Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode I'm joined by co-host Chris Mueller. From the View Askewniverse comes one of the most controversial comedies of all time, featuring a woman thrown into the middle of a holy war that includes divine characters and hapless humans fighting to prevent two outcast angels from re-entering heaven and tearing apart reality in the process. We're talking about Dogma. Dogma is written and directed by Kevin Smith and is the fourth film from the View Askewniverse. It was produced by Scott Mosier and was distributed by Lionsgate Films in the United States on November 12, 1999. Dogma is the story of Bartleby and Loki, two fallen angels searching for a way to get back into heaven. The pair get their opportunity thanks to a newspaper article detailing the rededication of a Catholic church in Red Bank, New Jersey. Anyone entering the church during the rededication receives a remittance of all sins. This means that if the two were to enter, then die immediately after becoming human, God would have no choice but to take them back. Metatron, also known as the voice of God, knows of the plan and also knows that if the angels succeed, they will essentially overrule the Word of God, which will erase all of existence. Metatron tells Bethany that God recently came to Earth in human form and has since disappeared, leaving virtually no one to deal with the threat. He convinces her to embark on the journey to stop Bartleby and Loki. Along the way, Bethany is assisted by the 13th Apostle, as well as two stoner prophets, all of whom set out to prevent the unthinkable from happening. Dogma was besieged with controversy during filming and upon its release. It was denounced as blasphemous by the Catholic Church and led to public protests outside of theaters during the movie's opening. Many film critics were much kinder, however, and applauded the movie as well as Kevin Smith. Dogma was also a financial success, making $44 million on a budget of $10 million. It remains the highest-grossing movie of the View Askewniverse. Thanks to the high-profile cast, the irreverent humor, and religious satire, Dogma stands out as one of the most popular films from Kevin Smith, a creator who continues to deliver content that keeps his fans coming back for more. And that's the lowdown on Dogma. So we've never really done religion here on the 6M. Imagine that, kids. Controversial topic that we don't really want to approach here on the show. But it can be controversial. It doesn't have to be, but it oftentimes is. And it's the cause of argument. It's the cause of debate. It's the cause of war, let's be honest. Ravaged the planet for centuries in the name of Christ or whoever else they're fighting for, or maybe not fighting for, or fighting against sometimes, I suppose. So yeah, religion is not anything we've ever really touched upon, except for the times that we'll say that, hey, this guy's doing the Lord's work, that kind of thing. But that's really it. God's just not really a topic of conversation on the show all that much. More power to those podcasters out there that approach the topic fearlessly and dive in head first. As you guys know, this is an entertainment pod, and all we do is geek culture and whatnot. So, this particular episode is probably the closest thing to religion you're going to get on the 6M podcast, because this time we're talking about Dogma, and it's hard to use the word controversy when it comes to these types of movies and not mention this particular film. Kevin Smith is, I don't know if you would call him a prolific filmmaker, but he's got his style. He knows what works for him. He knows what he's good at. And he has done that very thing for years, ever since Clerks. And maybe his style's not for everyone. And God knows the critics have come after him full throttle over the years. Sometimes, in my opinion, maybe they're justified. Other times I think they just have an axe to grind. And it could be that axe maybe began being forged in the fires of Dogma. So, Chris, the first time I've watched this movie in a long time was yesterday in preparation for this show. What's your first thoughts coming off of this? When's the last time you watched it? And does it hold up for you upon watching it again?
Well, I just rewatched it today. and that was probably the first time I'd seen it in, gosh, over 10 years, I bet.
Wow.
And I like this movie, but it's not a movie I would say completely holds up. I think there's a lot of outdated dialogue choices. There's definitely some having your cake and eating it too when it comes to the way he writes the movie in regards to religion.
Mm.
And it's also just, you know, I know that Kevin Smith writes strong, independent female characters, but he also writes some dialogue that's very cringeworthy towards women. So it's kind of hard to watch some of the scenes with Jay, specifically the way he talks about women. It's like, I get that he's supposed to be a jerk and he's supposed to be like a source of laughs, but at the same time, he's being propped up by these movies as like one of the protagonists, so it's a little uncomfortable. But I do think that among Kevin Smith movies, this is probably the one I think holds up the most in regards to just being a well-made movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the most profitable that he's ever made for sure. Made 44 million on a budget of 10 million. So yeah, it's by far the highest grossing film that he's ever done. Um, I think my first reaction coming out of this is I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed this film. I did try to keep in mind that this is a product of its time in terms of, were we as woke, for lack of a better term, in 1999? I would say no, not at all. I think we were getting there to some degree. Kevin has never really shied away from the gay conversation, and I think he's been applauded for that over the years, and as he should be. And Chasing Amy's a whole different topic for a whole different time, but he's never really run from topics such as that. I mean, he's tackled it head on, and he's been unapologetic and saying, "Hey, people should be free to do what they want, and it's not hurting you. What do you care? Let people live their lives." So, um, I don't know if you could say he's progressive filmmaker to that degree, but it's again, he didn't run from that here either. I don't know that I've ever seen him tackle religion the way he tackled it here. I mean, I said the word fearless earlier, man. I would say maybe this is a pretty bold move by a guy that directed Clerks, to come out with this. I mean, this is, he threw everything he had at it. When you talk about the dialogue in terms of him sort of having his cake and eating it too, what do you mean by that?
I mean, in terms of the religious stuff, because this movie, you could look at it as both an anti-religion movie, a pro-religion movie,
Mm.
and a movie that has nothing to say about either side. Like, there are multiple scenes where you have characters pointing out all of the logical fallacies with Christianity, and you have multiple scenes of people pointing out like the beauty of God's love. And this movie doesn't make any bones about whether or not God exists. Like, in the context of this movie, there is a God, there are angels. Like, they might not outright say it, but apparently Christianity was right all along, according to this movie. So it's like, is Kevin making an anti religion movie, a pro religion movie, or is he making a movie in the middle? Because I think there's a lot of people who look at this movie very different ways, and maybe he purposely left it open to interpretation, but I also think he kind of waffles a bit. Like, I feel like he wants to say one way or the other and he just doesn't.
You think that's a smart move on his part, or should he have picked a side?
Well, I mean, I think it's one of those things that at the end of the day, he's the artist, so it's totally up to him. But I noticed it more upon this rewatch than I did when I was younger, because I think I first saw this movie like right when it came out on VHS.
Mhm.
So uh I probably looked at this movie back then of being like, oh my God, this is so brilliant. It's saying all these things that I want to say about religion and blah, blah, blah. And now as an adult, I look at it and I'm like, what is he really saying with this movie? Because he's not really going one way or the other here. Like, he's got people making valid arguments on both sides and then never really decides to say whether or not one is better,
It's
which I guess
interesting.
is like probably the smart thing to do because that means it's a movie people will continue to talk about and debate and discuss. But at the same time, it felt like maybe a little cop out, no pun intended.
I see what you did there. I was just getting ready to say it's interesting that he would ride the fence with this film because maybe somewhere in the back of his head the thought was, hey, it's a major studio film. It's the most high profile thing I've ever done. There's some big names in this film. I mean, I can't speak for this guy obviously, but maybe the thought was maybe I should ride the fence to some degree and leave it up to the audience because if he goes hardline one way or the other, not that, I mean, he ticked off a bunch of people anyway, but I can't imagine if he'd flat out made it intentionally. There's quotes through the years, especially when the movie came out. Oh, this is blasphemy, and I'm like, you think this is blasphemy? Like I guess if I were hardcore in the church, maybe I'd see it that way, but I don't know, man. My definition of blasphemy maybe is not theirs. I mean? Let me ask you this, Chris. Do you have a religious background, any kind of faith, or anything you want to talk about? Like, is Catholic by any chance? Anything that you connected to in this movie at all?
I'm not religious. My family went to like a non-denominational church until I was about 4 or 5,
Hmm.
and I was just never really interested in it. I have my own beliefs on specific religions, but it's also one of those things where it's like I'm never going to sit here and say I know for sure what the right answer is. So I don't know if you want to classify me as agnostic or atheist or whatever people want to say, but I don't really identify as a religion.
Hmm. I I'm in the South, of course, and I grew up in a Baptist church, and
Sure.
yeah, and spent a lot of years in it, and up until my youth, and I was preteen going into teenage years, and I don't know, man. I've told this story in other circles before. I just got to the point where I just had a lot of questions that didn't seem to have any answers. And every time I asked, I wasn't made to feel like I shouldn't be asking, but the people in charge kind of didn't know what to say. And at some point I'm like, yeah, I kind of feel like someone's trying to do my thinking for me, and I don't really care too much for that. And I don't think I rebelled as much as I just kind of stepped away and said, I don't know if I like what I'm feeling anymore. I don't know if I'm feeling what I should be feeling anymore. And until I feel it, maybe I shouldn't be here. So, um, if I were still hardcore in church as I was as a young man, maybe this movie would offend the life out of me. But I think it's too much of a goofball, screwball comedy to be offensive. But that's just me talking. I mean, because they use the idea of God and religion in the Catholic Church, obviously they're going to get stones thrown at it. I mean, of course they are. But at the same time, it's like, relax, dude. This is a freaking comedy. This is not real. This is not supposed to be real. None of this ever happened. But, that's kind of who we are. It doesn't matter what year, what culture we're in. People are always going to be upset about something. So maybe Kevin was ahead of his time for the culture thing because people hated him for making a piece of art back in the day. I mean, can you see where the outrage comes from, or do you look at it and say, "Oh man, this is just too much"?
I mean, with Kevin Smith, it seems like if you're mad at him for something, it's always for a different reason. Like some people just don't like that his dialogue is so dirty, and it's like, all right, fine, that's your preference, whatever. But it's hard to deny that Kevin Smith is like a clever filmmaker who clearly has a knack for good dialogue and can write funny characters. But, you know, I don't think anybody is holding up Kevin Smith as like the auteur of our generation. Like he is just an indie filmmaker who has a cult following and is just a big nerd like the rest of us and doesn't hide it.
Yeah, yeah. He's been an inspiration for me. On sidebar, for the past several years, especially for the podcasting thing, because his point has always been, if you're podcasting to get famous, good luck, it may not happen. If you're podcasting to get rich, good luck, it may not happen. But the whole point of it is to put your voice out into the world. If you've got something to say it. Don't let anybody tell you can't do it. Don't let anybody tell you that you shouldn't have an opinion. If you've got something to say and you're a creator, then create something and put it out there. And it doesn't matter if it doesn't make the front page. It doesn't have to. The fact is that you're making something and you're fulfilling a desire you have to create. And I'm like, that inspired me, and it continues to do that. So I think he's much smarter than people give him credit for. He's a big time stoner now. So he probably won't get his.
Now, like he wasn't always.
Well, he says that he wasn't, that he didn't start until X number of years ago. And if you look at interviews and stuff that he did before, he was pretty straight laced. He wasn't really like, he was funny, but he wasn't. He looked like he was wide awake and whatnot. But now you see him and you're like, oh yeah, he's buzzed. He's high as a
Yeah.
kite.
He might just be stoned more often now, but you get the
That's-
impression that he was always kind of into it.
Yeah, yeah. He but yeah, there again, maybe he's not for everyone. Maybe he's not everybody's cup of tea. But like you said, no one's really probably holding him up as the voice of any sort of fine art filmmaking here. Um, the look of this film is unlike anything he's done. Obviously, I love the way it's shot. There's a lot of scenes that I just like the way I think he's got it. Again, I think he's underrated, which sounds weird to say about Kevin Smith as a filmmaker. I think he's a better filmmaker than he gets credit for. I mean, the shots that happen, I mean, there's one near the end with Bartleby coming down in front of the church, and it looks really good, I think. And I think Kevin's got a better eye. What do you think about how this film is shot, how it looks from a composition standpoint?
I mean, it's definitely his best film from a technical standpoint. I mean, the cinematography, there's very few special effects that aren't practical in this because it's not really that kind of movie. But like it all looks good,
Yeah.
So it might look a little hokey at times, but I think the only times it does is when it's intentional.
Ah,
But
good point.
yeah,
Yeah.
like I think with Kevin, he's never tried to be the $100 million blockbuster filmmaker. Like I'm not saying he would turn down a budget and an opportunity like that, because I think he would jump at the chance to write and direct a Superman movie again, even though we all know how that turned out.
Right.
But yeah, I think this movie definitely looks great. I think that the cast, this is probably his strongest ensemble cast of any of his films. I mean, just it's an insane list of people when you really look at it.
Oh, it really is. Um, it's a good segue. We'll go with that. Let's talk about the cast and the I would say the main two roles apart from Jay and Bob, of course, Ben Affleck and Matt Damon as Bartleby and Loki, respectively. Um, we're going to talk about it, but like, man, it's sometimes it feels like what more can you say about these two guys as a duo? I mean, they are. I was reminded of how good they are together, and I know they're speaking someone else's dialogue. I get it. So you're only as good as what you're saying. But man, I, again, Chris, I go back to the idea of underrated. Kevin's a very good writer, and his expertise is dialogue. And he'll say that he'll say all I am is a dialogue guy. I'm not a big action scene, fight scene guy. I'm a dialogue guy. I love the dialogue between Bartleby and Loki. Sometimes it's a bit clunky, as some of this movie tends to be in parts. But the way they deliver their lines, especially to each other, dude, it kind of feels like the cameras just happen to be there and they're actually having these conversations between each other. I think these two guys together, it's obvious that they gel and they have chemistry, man. What about these two guys as the main two angels of the film?
Oh yeah, they're great. I mean, this is right around the same time as Goodwill Hunting. So Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, like they were a powerhouse team. So getting them for this movie was obviously a big thing, but I thought they did a great job. Matt Damon really seemed to eat up some of those scenes where he got to like kill people and you could tell Ben Affleck enjoyed delivering some of those lines when he was going around insulting people. But yeah, I think just the whole movie doesn't I mean, like, they might be two of the main characters, but I would actually argue Linda Fiorentino's character is the main character,
Hmm.
but it is really an ensemble story.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that. That works for me. It's funny because when these two guys aren't in scene, their characters are still being talked about, so they sort of hang over everything. But you're right.
Sure.
It's almost like it's almost like that. Some of this cast is trying to figure out, like, these characters are discovering who they are and getting to know each other, while the specter of Bartleby and Loki is hanging just over their heads.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of them taking buses and trains because it slows down the progress. Because it's like, they're angels, why wouldn't they just fly? And we get the answer in the course of the film. It's like, well, if you fly, you're going to attract too much attention from both sides. So the movie's going to be over pretty quick. So we got to slow this thing down. I thought it was actually a pretty ingenious move to slow down the pace of the story.
Yeah, that was a good little right around because people obviously would have been like, "Oh, well, they're angels. They don't have some other way to travel." Like, well, yeah, of course they do, but Jason Lee came in and explained that, so it's fine.
Right,
But
right.
yeah, casting Jason Lee as Azrael and Selma Hayek as Serendipity and Chris Rock as Rufus, the 13th Apostle, like, and not to mention Alan Rickman, who, like, that guy, every role he just nails, and he's so good in this movie.
I think he brings a level of respectability to this film. He's not the only one that does, in my opinion, but nah, yeah, he brings a level of it to this film for sure as Metatron. And I got to circle back to Jason Lee. I'm a big Jason Lee fan. I just recently rewatched Almost Famous again for I don't know how many times it's been. I've seen that movie. He's so good in that. Jason Lee's just got a charm about him and just an everyman quality that I've always loved. And he just seems like it seems like you could have a highly intelligent conversation with Jason Lee. He just seems like a smart guy. Um, I love him as Azrael. And if you're going to cast him as anything in this movie, he's the sort of the wisecracking, arrogant, like, he looks like he should be a nice guy, but he's really a demon. Like, what do you think about his casting as a demon? Would you think there's another role he would have fit better? Or do you think it's a good bit of casting on Kevin's part here?
Oh no, this was great. Jason Mewes is a smartass. He plays a smartass really well.
Mhm.
So putting him in this role was great casting. I love My Name Is Earl. So
Yes.
I'm a Jason Lee fan too. I'm a little curious if this movie was made before or after he became a Scientologist.
Oh, ouch.
I
Oh, I
really
forgot
don't
about that.
know. I really don't know. But I think the one person who neither of us have mentioned yet, who we cannot not talk about, is George Carlin. Like,
Of course.
my God, I cannot tell you how many times I've listened to George Carlin's stand up specials. Like, I had CDs of George Carlin back when that was a thing. And watching him play the Cardinal and introducing Buddy Christ and Christianity Now or whatever, like, just all this different stuff. And he's like, putting in his office while he's talking, and that, like, just, it was perfect. He played that role so well. And you know that he loved the chance to play a member of the clergy because he has such a weird history with religion himself.
Oh, he is. Talk about the comedy stuff. There was an HBO comedy special he did that was live at Carnegie Hall, and I actually this is show my age. I had this recorded on an audio cassette because this is before I even had a VHS recorder, and I replayed that, and I'm sure my mom would not have approved of me listening to this. But you hear kids talking about growing up with a Bill Cosby album or a Richard Pryor album, like especially the Richard Pryor album, they're having to hide it. I I I had this Carlin thing on audio cassette, and it as a kid, I didn't know half the jokes what the half jokes were, but the way he's delivered them just cracked me up. Like, to this day, he is, and it's funny, dude, because like years later, people play clips of him on YouTube and whatnot, and all the comments are like, "Oh." this guy was so far ahead of his time. He's so right. And I'm like, dude, he was right since the 70s. Like, he's always been right. I don't think I've ever heard him be wrong. Like, all of his observational humor and his direct, commentary against organized religion and things of that nature, and politics especially. I mean, yeah, I'm with you. He's a perfect fit. Like, you don't cast an obvious religious guy for this role. You cast someone that feels like maybe it shouldn't work, but it totally works.
Yeah. And Carlin is just such a funny guy in general. Like, he's just naturally entertaining. So he was only in a couple of Kevin Smith movies. So like this was the first one, I think, too.
Yes, he was in
And
this. He was in Jay and Bob
Jersey
Strike Back.
Girl.
Yep.
Yeah.
Um,
So yeah, this was just brilliant casting to get him. And I mean, the only thing in this movie that I could complain about with regards to the cast is there wasn't enough Janine Garofalo. She's in it for like a minute.
right.
And this was at the height of Janine Garofalo's popularity. Like, what are you doing, Kevin? This kid, obviously this should be her best friend who's along for the ride and constantly making sarcastic remarks to Jay and Bob. Like, I don't know. I that just felt like a weird cameo to me that I was surprised wasn't a more important character.
That's a good take. I like that. And then somehow she ends up with Bob in the end. Like, that would have been cool. I would have been here
Yeah.
for that.
So, but of course, I mean, the decision that makes this movie hold up for me, like, it's still, in my opinion, one of the most brilliant strokes of genius casting was making Alanis Morissette God.
Hmm.
Like that one thing alone is what keeps this movie relevant for me.
I mean, what about it works for you? Because it's her, or because what she does? I mean, she didn't have any lines, but what is it about that works?
I think it's a little bit of everything. Like, for one, this was, again, Alanis Morissette was still super popular at the time.
Mhm.
She's not the character you would she's not the person you would expect to play God. Like, when Morgan Freeman shows up as a movie playing God, that makes sense to people. Like, I don't know why it makes more sense, but it does. But Alanis Morissette is like, for one, they obviously went to the effort of saying in this movie God is a woman, which is one of those takes that, like, you either find it entertaining or you don't, whatever. But
Right.
to make it Alanis Morissette of all people, it just, I don't know why, it just made me so happy.
Yeah.
And I'm not even like the biggest Alanis Morissette music fan. I just really like her.
Right. She was a '90s power singer icon for sure. Jagged Little Pill is still a killer album. I'm sorry. Um,
Oh yeah.
yeah, I was totally okay with her in this role because it's I'm going to use the word off-putting, but I don't mean it negatively. Because like when you see her and the doors open and it's her, you're like, she's God. But then it's like, wait a minute, yeah, she's short, she's pretty, she's not an actor. Yeah, of course. Like, you don't get some 70-year-old distinguished actor with a white beard who has amazing lines and gravitas because that's too easy. That's what people expect you to do. Like, I was totally okay with that because it's different. It's a very Kevin Smith move to say, hey, Alanis Morissette should totally be God in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, it really, like, making God a woman, for one thing, obviously right there you're going to have some people who are like, "Oh, that's stupid," whatever.
Hmm.
But you would think that if they're going to do that, that they would cast like some really distinguished older actress. Like, you always associate God with looking old, right? Like, everybody, it's
Hmm.
his white hair, white beard, if it's a man. And just to make it Alanis Morissette is just like, it, wholesome is the wrong word, but like there's just something kind of wholesome about this choice. Like,
Yeah.
it's just an innocent thing that I really enjoyed. I don't know why.
I mean, and plus, an alum of You Can't Do That on Television, which I grew up watching. So
Oh, me too.
Oh, there you go. There's a
The
deep cut there for
origins
you.
of the Nickelodeon slime.
Yes. Moose and God, now I'm gonna have to Alistair. Yeah, yeah. That's some
Yeah.
good stuff. Um, well, again, the cast is an ensemble cast. I personally think everybody's pretty much on par. I like Selma Hayek as an actress. There are moments when I kind of feel like, did we need serendipity? And it's not that I didn't like what she did, but it almost felt like, if this she weren't in this scene, would we have had the juxtaposition of what we needed, or was she necessary? But that's me being a nerd and picking through various bits of dialogue. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information, and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. I did like her. I like the idea that she was an actual person, but she was just an idea. She was I don't want to say spirit, but she was a muse is like something that just pops into your head and gives you inspiration. And then it becomes physical form for her. Like, and of course she's a stripper of all things, but I'm sure it didn't help the blasphemy argument at all.
Oh God.
Right?
I mean, Selma Hayek is great for one. So I'll never be upset to see her show up in a movie. And this movie, at the time, Selma Hayek, her big claims to fame back in those days were like Desperado and one scene in From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
So this felt like one of the first times that she was given a substantial amount of dialogue. And she did it well.
Yeah, for sure.
But But yeah, I really like Selma Hayek in this movie. I mean, it's one of those things where it's like, were any of the characters really necessary? No, but she's, if you can put Selma Hayek in your movie, you put Selma Hayek in your movie, especially back in 1999 when she was like one of the leading sex symbols in Hollywood.
And to bring it full circle, she was in Wild Wild West, which obviously has a definite Kevin Smith connection. So,
well, what's really funny too is like she was filming another movie at the same time as this. Kevin has talked about this in some things, and I think it was From Dusk Till Dawn.
Mm.
And so she would come back and Kevin would talk about how he would be like, so tell us what it was like going to work on a Robert Rodriguez movie. Cause like he's still at this point in his career, kind of a fanboy,
Oh yeah. Yeah. And still is too. Worth mentioning. I think he probably always will be. He still geeks out over this stuff. It's one of the things I love about this guy. I don't think he'll ever be so knee deep in Hollywood that he won't be a nerd, which is really cool.
No, and they won't let him get knee deep in Hollywood.
Oh, that's true.
I think there's enough people in Hollywood to where they're like, we don't need Kevin Smith for the big stuff. Like, let's just let him promote our projects for us because he's a fan of these characters.
Right.
But I like that he's sort of found this second career on TV, directing a bunch of episodes of Flash, and he did some stuff with Arrow and Legends of Tomorrow. Like, it really seems like he isn't just confining himself to the film stuff, which is good because, we all know that the film industry is super fickle. So he's creating a nice career for himself outside of that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I'm always, again, his humor is not for everybody. And there's times when it's a bit much. Like, I'll be honest with you, I couldn't get through the last Jay and Bob film. Like, I think I stopped 20 some minutes into it, legit stopped. And I'm like, oh, Tom, man, you've seen all this stuff. Just go watch it. And I'm like, nah, I don't know if I can finish it. And it's like, oh man. And like Clerks 2, Like I watched it, but I'm like, and then now part three is coming out this year. Again, he's gonna make what he's gonna make, and he's not looking for anything. He's just making himself happy. And I totally respect that. Like, but I mean, have I grown, have I evolved, have I aged out of his movies? I don't know. I guess it's possible.
I think for me, I'll revisit his movies from time to time, but there was a point in my life where that type of dialogue was appealing to me, and now it can be a little grating.
Yeah.
Because if you really break down Kevin Smith, especially in this movie, a lot of scenes have one character giving some very pointed opinions about Christianity.
Hmm.
And regardless of which character it is, it always feels like it's the same voice giving that opinion. And that's when it starts to feel to me like half of this script feels like a bunch of college kids sitting around having their first deep conversations about religion.
Hmm.
And at a certain point, you get to a point in your life where it's like, okay, well, we all know and accept these things now, so we don't need to talk about them ad nauseum anymore. And so when you hear them in these movies again, you're like, okay, these are conversations me and all my friends have had a million times too. Like, there's nothing of substance there anymore. But I think at the time that this movie came out, there was. It's just, not everything ages to perfection. So I think that's one of the areas where this movie might fall a little short, is that every character's dialogue, when they're giving these pointed opinions on Christianity, it all feels like it's coming directly from Kevin Smith.
Of course, yeah. That's just what I was going to say. It feels like it's just him speaking. Is there a way
Which is
around is
fine.
there a way around that where it doesn't feel that way, or is it just going to end
Well,
up being that way anyhow?
if I was a jerk, I would say a better writer would differentiate characters by the dialogue
Ah,
choices, but I don't think I could do a better job or anything like that. That's why I'm not trying to be too harsh about it. But,
right.
you know, you look at some of Kevin Smith's movies, and there are characters that feel different from each other. Like, I think it's one of those things he got better with as he went on.
Hmm.
Because every, like, Mallrats has the same thing. Every character in Mallrats is super witty and gives these super long
Oh, yeah.
diatribes
Yes.
about their opinions, and it's like, this is all just Kevin Smith ranting to his friends, and then he just puts it down on paper, and that's what the dialogue is for these movies, which is, again, which is fine. That's not a criticism. That's just one of those things that I think you can only take that kind of dialogue for so long before you get to a point where you're like, all right, now I want characters that feel fleshed out and different. Like, one movie that I like to point to that's really good at that is Knives Out.
Mm, yes.
Every character in Knives Out felt different and had different motivations and a different way of speaking. And, like, people will give Ryan Johnson a bunch of crap for what he did with Star Wars, but, like, that movie proves that he is a good writer and a good filmmaker.
That's a really good
And
flick.
yeah, and I would say that Kevin Smith is funnier than Ryan Johnson. Ryan Johnson's just better at differentiating those characters. So that's why, different filmmakers make films different ways for different audiences.
Mm,
And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but at a certain point, I do think I started to outgrow the Kevin Smith style of dialogue. And
mhm.
now it's just kind of a fun nostalgia trip for me. It's not one of those movies that I can throw on once a year.
Mm, wow. I, I get what you're saying because there is a bit in Mallrats when they're on the dating show, and it's TS's girlfriend, and I'll never forget this bit of dialogue, but she says, "And what did you do to repair that breach?" And I'm thinking, never in my life. Now, I'm not exactly hanging out with sophisticates over here or college professors, but never in my life have I ever heard the words, "What did you do to repair that breach?" What? Like, that took me out of the scene, and I'm like, okay, this movie is either way smarter than I am, or this movie's trying really hard to be way smarter than I am because, man, people don't talk this way.
And that is the problem with some of these movies from that era.
Yeah.
Like late 90s, early 2000s, we had a lot of, and I'm going to categorize him along with somebody that a lot of people are canceling these days, but like Joss Whedon was the same way. Like
Mm,
there's a lot of wit to their dialogue, but the substance isn't exactly there all the time. And you know, you can argue for or against both methods. Like, you know, Kevin Smith writes movies that are entertaining and funny to a certain age group of people at a certain time in their life.
true. Very true.
It is what it is, you know. So like I kind of think John Hughes is the same way. Like John Hughes movies, for me, I'm not like the biggest John Hughes nerd in the world. So for me, I can't rewatch 16 Candles every year because that's not a story that's meant for me at this point in my life anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you've passed that up a few years ago.
Sure.
Same here.
So
Same
like,
here.
but like I do still find Dogma to be a good movie just because there's so many other positive things to take away from it. Like, yeah, the dialogue can be a little dated, but all of those movies were back then. Like, I was just talking about this with somebody recently. Fight Club does not hold up the way people want it to.
Hmm.
There is some very cliched dialogue in Fight Club that might not have been cliched at the time, but now it is.
Wow.
And for one thing, I think Fight Club is one of those movies that so many people got the wrong message from when they first saw it. And so it ended up getting popular for all the wrong reasons. I don't know. That might just be me, but I feel like a lot of people missed the anti-capitalism message and were just focused on the fact that Brad Pitt was cool.
It does have a very stylized, I guess, nostalgia attached to it because it's the no one talks about Fight Club and all that other stuff that people would throw around. It got into the mainstream. I think it's probably still in mainstream to some degree too.
I mean, the problem is that you cast an actor like Brad Pitt, naturally people are going to like that character because Brad Pitt at that time he's a cool guy, you know. But like you're not supposed to actually think Tyler Durden is cool.
Right.
So that's where the disconnect in that movie comes from. And I think that's a problem with Kevin Smith's characters sometimes too, is like it's hard for me to connect to any of the characters in his movies because they all just feel like different versions of Kevin Smith.
Hmm. I don't think I've
Like
ever heard it put that way.
Salma Hayek is just what Kevin Smith would sound like if he was a hot woman.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I've never
Like,
heard it put that way, but actually it makes a lot of sense.
yeah. And again, and like I know that sounds like a criticism. It's not. It's just an observation.
Right, right. I get it. Is one of the big saving graces of this film compared to his other ones is that this line's going to sound like a jab, and here I am calling myself a Kevin Smith fan, but I don't mean it to be a jab. This movie has a substantial plot when some of his other movies don't really have a plot. They're just kind of moving along at their own pace. But this movie has a plot and a destination it's trying to get to. Is that why this feels different than other movies that he's done?
Yes, this movie definitely follows the three act structure a little closer than something like Clerks or Mallrats does, which, you know, 90% of the movie is them effing around
Hmm.
until you get to the final scene. This movie has several characters with different motivations, all working towards achieving their goal. In between, they're having these cliched conversations I talked about, but they are all trying to accomplish different things for different reasons. So, yeah, this movie definitely feels the most Hollywood of Kevin Smith's movies, if that makes sense. Because I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like, this is the most film like movie that he's made. Like, the rest of his movies are very independent movie feeling, and this feels like a proper movie.
Right, of course, yeah. Let's talk a bit about the plot because I want to get your take on this. Because kids, if the plot loses you, you may not enjoy this film because if you don't have a religious background, if you have no connection at all, and you don't get the Catholicism part, which I don't get a lot of it, if I'm being honest, um, you may not enjoy the flick. But essentially, Bartleby and Loki, the aforementioned Affleck and Damon, are fallen angels banished from heaven to Wisconsin, which apparently is not a place you want to spend your time. Never been there, couldn't tell you. I like their cheese. Don't care much for their football team. But supposedly Loki, Matt Damon's character, was drunk and resigned as the angel of death, encouraged by Bartleby. And what happens is, during the course of the movie, Cardinal Glick, of course, George Carlin's great character, decides to rededicate his church, his Catholic church in Red Bank, New Jersey. He's got the Buddy Christ, which still holds up. That'll always hold up because that's hilarious. Love it.
I hope Kevin Smith has that statue in his house or something, because that thing needs to remain.
I'll be shocked if he didn't. And anyone who enters the church during the rededication festivities will receive a plenary indulgence, which means, in essence, a remitting of all sins. If the banished angels undergo this, in other words, walk in and then die afterward, becoming humans and dying in human form, God would have no choice but to allow them back into heaven, which essentially is going to undo God's will, because God threw them out. If he has to let them back in, it's undoing what he previously said or she previously said. So they can't be allowed back in. Now we find out, spoiler alert, kids, Azrael is the one that tipped him off to this, because he would take no existence versus being in hell anymore, which is his driving force. So all this is kind of Azrael's fault. What's your take, Chris, on the plot? Is it too many holes? Is it too crazy? Or is this a pretty solid idea for a movie of this type? Is there some substance to this?
Well, I can't say that I'm a theologian or a scholar of any kind, but I think the plot does make sense. Like, I can't really find anything super fallible in it, even if it's not some, like, if any of the stuff that they say is part of Christianity isn't, I don't know. Like, I'd never heard of Megatron before this movie, so I'm just like,
Right.
Fiorentino's character. Like,
same here. Yeah.
If there's not a movie about it, I probably don't know much about it.
Right.
Which is funny, because like I probably know more about some other religions than I do Christianity, just from like being interested in looking it up. And so, yeah, I think the plot of this movie works for me, because I don't think it's so complicated that you can't follow it, but it is complicated enough to support that many moving parts and that many characters. Like, Azrael has his own motivations. He wants existence to be wiped out. Whereas Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, they don't really know that that's what's going to happen when they go through that. And then you have Fiorentino's character, who's sort of being pushed along by Chris Rock and Alan Rickman, who are doing things because they want God back. Like, there's a lot of moving parts, but I don't think any of it is too hard to follow. No. And I do got to point out something before I forget. The movie opens with a shot of a church, and it says McHenry, Illinois at the bottom. That is where I was raised.
Nice.
So when me and my friends saw that in McHenry, Illinois, when we watched this movie, we were freaking out. And then it took us all of 2 seconds to go, wait a minute, that church doesn't exist in McHenry. So it was like really cool that they picked this little, like, at the time this movie came out, McHenry was probably 22,000 people. So like not a big place.
Right.
And for them to pick that, I think Jason Mewes has some connection to McHenry. Like, I think one of his family members lives here or something like that. And maybe that's why they chose it. But like, to see that pop up in a movie was amazing. And then to realize, like, oh no, they didn't actually use any of our churches for this one insignificant shot was a little disappointing.
Interesting. It's funny how things work. I was under the assumption. First of all, part of me said, "Yeah, Bartleby and Loki don't know," but I feel like there was a bit of dialogue that I forget what scene it is now or who said it, but something to the effect of Bartleby ends up not caring what happens to humankind because they've squandered their opportunities. So for him, if existence ends, he doesn't really care. But maybe he thinks that means only humans. Maybe that's where the disconnect comes from, because you would think these two guys would be smarter and would know if this happens, everything, goes to hell, right? So I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it seemed like Matt Damon had a point at first when he was like, "Yeah, but these are the laws of man, and the laws of man are fallible."
Right.
And then as soon as Affleck points out that thing about like what's his face say about, if you hold it true on earth, I shall hold it true in heaven. So like it felt like that was Kevin Smith's get out of jail free card a little bit, to be like, well, I can basically make up anything I want as long as it's God's decree.
Right.
Which, let's face it, like, how is that any different from religion anyway?
Good point. Yeah, not much. Um, we talked about Linda Florentino in this movie as Bethany Sloan, who is however many greats there are in what Chris Rock's character tells her, great grandniece of Jesus Christ, which, I was always led to believe, apart from this movie, growing up in church, that yes, Mary and Joseph did have children after Jesus. The way I was taught was that was common knowledge. So when they said it in this movie, oh, that's a movie, and I'm like, that's kind of what I was raised to believe as well. So, dude, there's got to be a possibility that there's somebody walking around, if you're into this sort of stuff, that's got the same blood going through his veins or her veins. I mean, I don't
Isn't this
think
the
that
basis of the
part.
Da Vinci Code too?
You know what? I never got into those films. I never read the books. I know nothing, virtually nothing about it.
Yeah, like what's her face? Audrey Tauto's character is supposed to be like the long, 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 long lost descendant of Christ in some way.
Interesting. Now it makes me
So
want to go
yeah,
check it out. Is it worth watching?
uh, hmm. I think they're well-made movies that don't really go anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought
Interesting.
the first one was better than the second one,
Hmm.
personally, but that's just me.
Yeah, it's one of those, that's a weird corner of a Hollywood franchise that is always existed for years, that I've just never approached. Like, this is going to be a shocker, Godfather. I've seen bits and pieces growing up. It's never been anything I've gravitated toward. I don't have any disdain toward it because I don't know enough to not like them. But it's not like, oh my God, I've got to sit down and watch this. Eh, I don't know. I don't know if I feel like and I like everyone in the freaking movie, but man, I don't know. It's nothing I really gravitate toward.
Most overrated film franchise in existence.
See, you're not the first person that's told me that either.
I I I respect how well the movies are made.
Yeah.
I do not think that they are the masterpieces that some people hold them up as. And again, it's one of those things where it's like everybody's opinion is valid. This is mine. I don't think that the Godfather movies are as good as the majority of people I know.
Now, you might have some people shouting blasphemy at that on this show, but I watched
Eh.
Scarface as a man, as an adult, and I came away from that going, "That's Scarface." Like, I mean, it's okay, but I didn't come away from that going, "Oh my God, instant classic." I can see why this movie is, I don't know. I was okay with it.
It's hard to judge movies from more than 20 years ago by today's standards. So
Yes.
like the first time I saw The French Connection, I was like, this movie's okay.
Hmm.
But like what I didn't realize was at the time that that movie came out, nobody had ever seen anything like that. Like that car chase in that movie was like a first of its kind. And I've just seen so much since then that's like improved upon it that
Mm.
once you get around to the thing that started the trend, you're like, it's all right. Which, that happened with that's what happened with Ghost in the Shell.
Mm.
Like Ghost in the Shell inspired so many sci-fi franchises that when they finally got around to making a live action movie, everybody's like, "Oh, I've already seen all this stuff." It's like, "Well, yeah, you've seen it in other movies that were inspired by the original Ghost in the Shell."
Right.
And it also doesn't help that they put Scarlett Johansson in the movie, but we don't need to get into that.
Well, I thought, was it Charlize Theron?
No, it was Scarlett.
Oh, was it? Interesting.
Yeah,
Why was I thinking it
because
was?
that was that whole. I think that movie was what spawned the interview clip where she's like, "I'm an
Ah,
actor. I should be able to play whatever I want."
ah. So, all right. So Charlize Theron played Aeon Flux. Is that what I'm getting?
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah,
That's
but
it.
like Ghost in the Shell is a decidedly Asian story that should
Right.
not have had a white woman in the role. And they tried to write around it, but it just didn't work.
I'm in the bag for Scarlett Johansson, so I can't really.
Like I love Scarlett Johansson, but there are certain roles that just should go
Of
to certain
course.
people. Like you're not going to cast Lindsay Lohan to play Martin Luther King, like
Right.
there's certain things that you don't do.
I mean, you may be
And
underestimating her acting chops. I'm just saying.
what, Lindsay Lohan? Listen, I don't think she had a dream that's is important.
I agree. Um, yeah, uh, in terms of this movie, and we were talking about the characters in this movie. We haven't talked a lot about the apostle. Chris Rock feels like he's here for the comedy relief, which sounds weird because it's a comedy. But man, his laughs are top shelf laughs. I mean, his jokes. Chris Rock could. What's the old saying? You could read the phone book and get a laugh, or get a standing ovation. He's so good. He's so funny. And I love the thought because he puts it over, and this is probably Smith talking also. This idea that the Bible that we have in our hands today is nowhere near the original text because it's went through the hands of men, namely white men, over the course of centuries, which is 100% true. I don't even know if an actual original text of the Bible even exists. I don't think it does. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm
Well,
not a
really,
theologian in here either.
there really is no original Bible because the Bible is a collection of writings from other people. Like
Right.
there was no one author at any point, and most of those writings came many, many years after the events that they're writing about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Jesus, everybody played telephone when they were a kid. You can't you can't pass something around a group of 20 kids without it changing. So what makes you think that any of religion would be the same thing as it started? Like
Oh, of course.
it's but it is what it is. I'm one of those people that believes as long as you're not hurting anybody, live your life however you want. But I have my own issues with organized religion.
Yeah, I don't like people pointing at me and telling me I'm living wrong. I don't care for that. I just don't care for, like you said, if you're not hurting anyone, it doesn't matter. Like I've made this silly, you know, diatribe before about, somewhere in the deepest jungles of some country somewhere, they're worshiping this big rock that kind of looks like a monkey. And to them that's God. And the whole tribe does it, and they all, to them that's God. That's their God, and they pray to it and they bow to it and they even leave flowers for it. And man, don't upset the rock that kind of looks like a monkey, because that thing right there, that's God. Well, okay, so they're wrong, but you're over here in your nice dress every Sunday in the South, and you got, and you're all listening to the dude yelling from the pulpit, but you're right. What makes you right? But those guys in the jungle praying to that rock that kind of looks like a monkey, so they're crazy, but you're not. Like, I don't understand who said, wait a minute, all you people are wrong, but we're right. Like that is the epitome of arrogance to me. And if there is a God, he or she is up there going, dude, like Chris Rock said, you've got it all wrong. No one's ever gotten it right. It's all been screwed up from the jump. That would make sense to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if you really like, if you look at religion from a completely objective standpoint and break it down to like the base story, like most religions draw from the exact same type of story, and they're all a little crazy. It's just some of them have bigger followings than other, and that's why they're more socially acceptable. Like, I don't know, people forget sometimes about like, you know, the Leviticus parts of the Bible, like the really crazy stuff. I think a lot of people just gloss over that. And, you know, to mock like a small religion because you think their ideas are crazy, like if you don't examine your own religion and come to the same conclusion, then it's just bias.
I think you get a different perspective when you hear like someone like Lewis Black talk about it, and especially Carlin and even Mark Maron, who's got some great takes. I saw Maron live doing stand up, and he used the words "zombie Jesus" in his recollection or his opinion of religion. And we're in Charlotte, North Carolina. It had some groans. I'm gonna be honest with you, and people looking around like, "Is it okay to laugh at this?" And I'm howling because I'm like, "Relax. It's a comedian. Have fun. Good Lord."
And
Like,
really, isn't Jesus a zombie?
well, I
Like
mean, if you really want to get
by the
technical about it.
by the definition of most fictional zombies, he died and then came back to life. Like that's a
Well,
zombie.
depending on what universe you're
Or a
talking about.
vampire. Or a
Right.
vampire.
Right. I was going to say vampire, or if it's, Kurtman's universe, he's a walker. He's not a zombie. So
Maybe he's a Highlander.
he could be. There can only be one. So
Yeah.
maybe he's the one.
I mean, if he's a pacifist, then one of the McLeods decapitated him a long time ago.
Well, that's true. That's true. I'm a bigger fan of Duncan MacLeod, if I'm being honest. So
Um, he was the TV show one, right?
he was.
Yeah, I like both. I was a fan of the Highlander stuff. They're super cheap. Like both the TV show and the movies are super cheesy to go
Yeah.
revisit now.
Yeah.
But they keep like every couple of years I hear something about like, oh, they're gonna bring back Highlander, and it never quite happens. And I kind of want them to, just because we haven't had like a good modern day sword fighting
I
story in a
agree.
while.
Yeah. And
Like, what was the last one? Blade?
I think so. And I think there's enough of a fan base there to make money off of it. I really do.
Oh, sure.
And Adrian Paul, to his credit, and one of the early 6M episodes was on Highlander, the series. Adrian Paul, to his credit, got much better as the show went on. Because in the beginning, I don't even know that he was an actor per se, but man, toward
It
the end
was
of the run
very
of,
soap opera-ish in the beginning.
yeah, toward the end of the run of that show, he got very good and committed to the part, learned how to sword fight, learned the hand to hand stuff, wanted to do the stunts. I always got mad respect for someone that's like, no, I don't want a body double. Just teach me. If my character can do this, I want to know how to do this. Show me how to do it. I actually dig that stuff.
Yeah, I liked that show. I thought the last season got real weird,
Yeah.
and then the movies that they made got real weird too. And like, really, it's like Highlander 1 and then the first 4 or 5 years of the TV show. I think that's how most people remember Highlander.
Mm-hmm.
They don't remember the goofy Highlander 2 sequel that made no sense, or any of the other ones that featured Adrian Paul that got progressively weirder,
Yeah.
or how that last season of the show was almost like one long dream sequence, I guess.
Right. Yeah, it does feel like a very time capsule kind of concept now, the whole Hollander thing, unfortunately.
But
But
I want it to come back
I do
because
too.
it's just cool to watch a dude run around with a katana.
Plus, the first movie opens with a pro wrestling match. I mean, come on. What more could you
and
ask for?
and the Queen soundtrack was
Yes,
definitely a big plus.
absolutely. Um, two characters that, of course, we've talked about, but we've not really talked about them as a pair. For all their flaws And the fact that Jay, as you said at the beginning here, doesn't age very well, because it sure doesn't. Jay and Silent Bob is as iconic of a duo, I would think, in modern cinema as anything we've seen. And that's not to say that they've been in any kind of classics, because they haven't. But if you show Jay and Silent Bob to the average moviegoer, I mean, I would say, I don't know how many out of 10 people, you would think that at least X number of people would go, I know those guys. And then, of course, a certain age bracket will go, oh, that's Jay and Silent Bob. Have a product or a service that you want to get out into the world? Always wanted to try your hand at podcasting but don't know where to start? We've got you covered. Pod for Hire is a podcast production company that offers turnkey services to fit your needs. We produce your show from start to finish, allowing you the valuable time you require to focus on your established clients as well as prospective clients. We pride ourselves on delivering a top-notch product that will set your business apart from the rest and give your company the exposure it deserves. For more information, give us a call at 1-828-800-9880 or email us at info@podforhire.com. Pod for Hire. We take the work out of podcasting. I love the idea of the sidekicks, the whole Batman and Robin stuff, which they kind of exploited in Mallrats. But apart from Jay's shtick here, they're called prophets by Metatron in this movie, which always felt like a stretch, and even more so when I rewatched this film. But they did serve a purpose. But I don't know. It's almost like they almost felt like ancillary characters to some degree. But it's Kevin Smith's movie, so of course Jay and Bob's going to be in it. What do you think about Jay and Bob in this film? Do they fit? Does it feel like they were shoehorned in, or does it make sense that they're in this?
I mean, other than Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, they're not really necessary to the plot of any of Kevin Smith's movies.
Right.
They're just sort of the connective tissue. I think that they worked in this movie, being a little bit bigger parts than they were in things like Mallrats or Chasing Amy or whatever. But yeah, some of the Jay dialogue is just hard to listen to. Honestly, even back then, some of his stuff was pretty hard to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
And just now it's even worse. And I know that, like, there's an argument to be made that, like, he is supposed to be a detestable character, so it's okay for his character to say those things. And I kind of agree. Like, it's okay for head characters to say terrible things. Like, that is what makes them bad. It's like, if you're going to portray the KKK in a movie, you're not going to portray them as friendly, loving dudes. You're going to portray them as terrible people, because that's what they are, right?
Right.
So I get that. My only issue is that Jay's a protagonist in these stories, so just hearing him talk that way is just slightly uncomfortable for me as somebody who does, like, appreciate and respect women.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of their stuff, I don't want to say a lot, but I would say 99% of Jay's dialogue in any movie that the character's ever been in has been pretty atrocious. Be interesting to see what Clerks 3 will present, because I don't remember how bad it was. I don't think it's as bad as it has been, because I think Kevin Smith is pretty well clued in that, like, there's some stuff we can and can't do now. I mean, I do love the bit on the train when he throws Bartleby out the back door and he has to give the Indiana Jones line from Last Crusade when he looks at the guy who's scared to death and he says, "No ticket." That's, dude, I'm here for that. That made me howl. I'd forgotten that bit until I watched the movie again.
You know what's funny is if you really look too, like, this was one of the times in Kevin Smith's career where he had slimmed down considerably.
Yes.
Like, yeah, so it was kind of funny to see him throwing dudes around and actually fighting a little bit. But yeah, it's Kevin Smith is good at those references that make you smile. Like, he's a big movie and comics nerd and TV nerd and all that stuff too. So yeah, we're going to get those kind of references in any Kevin Smith project. And they're always going to put a smile on my face because they never really feel like super egregious.
Right. It's funny because when this movie was being protested, and man, was this movie protested. Um, there were people outside. I guess it was the studio or wherever it was, and Kevin Smith himself went out there among the protesters and even got interviewed by a news reporter. And it's the best stuff you've ever seen because he's trying to blend in like he's one of them. And I think they knew who he was.
Well, that happened with Red State too, right?
I did not know that. That's awesome.
Oh, he actually ended up. Um, who's that really religious family down south? Not the Bakers. They're like, their church is pretty well known for being bigoted.
Oh man, there's a lot of them. You're gonna have to be more specific.
I can't remember who it is, but I guess they showed up to protest Red State.
Mm-hmm.
And Kevin Smith was doing some radio interview, and he's like, well, let's just do a counter protest. And so, like, it was maybe like 10 people from this guy. Oh, was it Jerry Falwell?
Jerry Falwell sounds right.
Maybe. So they ended up having like tons of counter protesters, and 10 people from this church showed up. Like, it was ridiculous. And I guess Kevin Smith actually talked to one of his daughters and convinced them to like actually sit down and watch the movie before judging it. And I guess she left after 10 minutes because she's like, this is terrible, I'm leaving, Kevin.
Wow.
But the funniest part was that like Kevin Smith told the kids, or like told people, like, just bring signs saying whatever. And so like one kid had a sign that just had an Ewok with that no smoking symbol stamped over it. Like, this kid's still mad about the Ewoks all these years later.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I like I said when we started this episode here, I keep up with a lot of his stuff now, and during the podcast that will go live on YouTube, he will sometimes read comments from the chat, and when people are criticizing him or going off on him, or oh man, why are you still talking about this? Because everyone online is a jerk because they can be. Because no one would ever. What's the CM Punk line? No one would ever say these things to my face because they know I would choke them out if they did. It's the truth. Like, no one would ever talk to you to your face the way people talk to you online. So when they're kind of poking at him a little bit, he'll say, "All right, sorry, we'll move on to the next thing." I'm thinking, dude, I know you want to maintain your audience, but there's some point where it's like, it's okay to push back. I kind of feel like he's to a point now where he's been through so much controversy through the years that now, instead of looking for it, now instead of fighting back, he's just like, I'm going to give you the most unoffensive, something that's as neutral as I can, my take on this movie or this show or whatever. And I get it, but like, I don't know, the rebel in me, whatever that means, wants him to stay. No, look, you can. I don't care. It's fine if you don't like my stuff, but stop making this personal. If you don't like my stuff, turn it off.
Yeah, I agree.
So, but yeah, the most controversial thing he's done is Dogma. I would say hands down. But it's
Have
also.
you seen Red State? That's pretty.
I have never seen Red State. I don't know why I haven't.
That's worse than this.
Really?
Because like that movie just. It's more of a horror movie. That's why.
Ah, there you go. Yeah, I don't know why I have never seen Red State. When you say it's worse than this, what do you mean in terms of the content?
Well, it's like, if you want to use that language, it's more blasphemous. Like, it's a way more deeply rooted religious story than this one was. It's like, I think it's literally about the oncoming apocalypse.
Wow. Speaking of apocalypse, there was there was talks of there being a part 2 of Dogma, because this movie does leave it wide open for the possibility of a second film. But now he's on the record as saying that there's no chance, because at this stage in his life he doesn't. Again, the word controversy. He doesn't want to stoke the fire anymore. He's got nothing left to say on it. He doesn't want to do it. And I get it, but like at the same time, I don't necessarily think you have to have anybody from the original cast in here. I mean, Florentino's character, yeah, maybe, but she's pregnant at the end of this film, which was kind of, I actually forgot that bit. It was very touching to me. I don't know why it touched me the way it did, but knowing what her character went through and her coming full circle and then she's pregnant at the end, I thought was a really nice touch. But it's sort of mimicking the whole, virgin birth kind of thing, the quote unquote, whatever. But do you think there's a world in which a part two could have happened? And do you think it would have worked, or does it everything just depend on the story?
So the whole thing with Jesus is that like his whole religious story sort of starts at the age of 30. And before that he's kind of just a carpenter. So I think
Mhm.
it would be hilarious if 30 years after this movie comes out, Kevin Smith writes a movie about this young virgin birth kid who's 30 years old now and is just a slacker who does not want to be the son of Jesus, and like he's just hanging out with Jay and Silent
Oh.
Bob smoking weed, and Linda Fiorentino's telling him that he needs to get off the couch and get a job, and like then you know Rufus shows up and is like, "Oh, did you not know you're the son of God? Yeah, you got responsibilities. Come on." And like, some other adventure takes place, but I could totally see that working.
Oh my God, I think I'm here for that. Um, would you still need the star power? Would it be too much of a Kevin Smith centric his core cast, and would it be too small? Would I mean would you'd still well you couldn't really do Damon and Affleck at that point because their story's over. Would you have to bolster that cast with somebody big? You think?
Well, I mean, you could get people like Selma Hayek, Alanis Morissette. You know, I don't know if Linda Fiorentino acts that much anymore, but uh, I think there's enough people from the cast that weren't killed in the movie and are still alive in real life. Like, unfortunately, you can't get Carlin back, but
Mm,
there's plenty of actors who could play a religious figure now who would be just fine.
right.
Um, but yeah, they would need some kind of antagonist, so they would probably have to find somebody, and yeah, they could. I mean, Kevin Smith is one of those guys like he's kind of just friends with a lot of people in Hollywood, so a lot of people will just be like, "Yeah, I'll show up and play a bad guy in one of your movies for 5 days. Why not?"
Yeah, I could see that actually. Um, there's one bit of this film we haven't talked about yet because it's. I think you made a comment as we kicked this thing off that it's something that was just I forget how you said it, but for me this was one of those bits that yeah, this kind of took me way out of it. The Golgothan. It's I don't know who this is who this character is here for, but it's not me. Like this feels like a bit of adolescent, you know, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's the crap monster. And I just thought it was I don't think it was good then, and I don't think it's good now. So I could have done without it. What's your take on the crap? What do they call it? The excremental?
Yeah, I don't know what that was. Um, it almost felt like they were like, "We've got some money in the budget. What do you want to do with it?" And Kevin Smith's like, "What's the stupidest thing we could think of?" And Jason Mewes goes, "A monster made out of crap." And then Kevin goes, "Yeah, yeah, that's pretty stupid. Let's do it."
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. It's another one of those things where it's like it's a small part of the movie, so it didn't take me out completely, but it doesn't necessarily need to be there.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't care for it at all. A little bit about the casting here. I didn't know this little nugget. Jason Lee, Kevin actually wanted him for Loki. Um, but of course, Damon gets the role because Affleck's coming in the movie, and these two guys have chemistry together. And Kevin also wanted Sam Jackson as Rufus, which would have been just as amazing, in my opinion. It would have been a different Rufus, but man, that was cool. I mean,
That
just
would have been funny.
oh my god, yeah. Um, Alan Rickman uh, came in, of course. Albert Brooks offered the role of Cardinal Glick, but turned it down. And I don't know about Albert Brooks all that much. If he's Catholic, perhaps he is. Don't know for sure. But, you know, let me ask you this. Uh, is it, I mean, like an actor or actress, if they're presented a role like this, I mean, does your faith prevent you from doing it? I mean, you are an actor. Like, what? This
I
isn't
mean,
real. Like, I mean, would it stop you from doing it?
Albert Brooks was on a season of that show Weeds with
That's
Mary Louise
right.
Parker.
Yeah.
So I doubt that this would have really ruffled his feathers, but I could totally see that working too. Cause, like, he's the voice of Hank Scorpio on The Simpsons. Like, he could totally pull off that kind of dialogue that they were giving to Carlin.
Hmm. Yeah. It's weird. I love little tidbits and things that you end up finding out about these about characters in different movies. Um, yeah, it's again, I do think it's his best movie to date. Um, I honestly, coming away from it from the first time in years, I was impressed by. Yeah, it's got its moments of looking at it through the eyes of the day and age we're in now. You know, but as a whole, I mean, if it's anybody but Kevin Smith, I don't know if this movie gets crapped on, no pun intended, as much as maybe it did and maybe still does for some reason. Um, I honestly think it works from start to finish. Because maybe the reason it works for me is because the plot is fairly simple. It's a simple idea. It's not hard to, and I think you made a great point earlier. It's not hard to get your head around what the idea here of this movie is. I mean, how do you think this thing will stand the test of time, or will it? It is it too dated for its time, or do you think it will? Do you think it can still speak to whoever after this point, or to this point, or what do you think?
I think for people who were of like I said earlier, of a certain age at that time, this movie will always kind of hold up a little bit. But I don't think that this is a movie that 50 years from now
Hmm.
film students will be studying as, a fine example of filmmaking. Like, in the grand scheme of things, this is just another dumb screwball comedy.
Hmm.
Like, we may hold it in a little bit of higher regard because it's a Kevin Smith movie,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, like, this is just as dumb as so many of the other movies that came out back then, but I still like it because it's a good cast, it's funny. Some of the dialogue is dated, yeah, but I think for the most part everything makes sense. So I think it'll hold up for some people, but I don't see this being a movie that continues to form a larger and larger cult following. This isn't going to be the Rocky Horror Picture Show in 20 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know what? Not a big fan of that either.
No, me neither. but, but I recognize the cultural impact it's had.
I can respect that. That comment right there, I can say I can
Yeah.
point to several things and say I respect it, but I'm not a fan.
Yeah, like Metallica. I think Metallica has some, they're great, but I'm not going to listen to them.
Interesting. Um, I have been a fan of Metallica for a long time. Uh, I've never seen them live, mostly because I don't have enough money. Because I'm sure the tickets are not cheap. So
Yeah.
I've always wanted to see Paul McCartney live, and the last time he came to my neck of the woods, yeah, we're talking go mortgage your house. I'm like, nah, love the guy, but nah, I can't, can't. Another story for another time. There's 2 points here I got to hit you with because I got to get your take on it. Number one, the idea that God is a skee ball fanatic and has been for years, so he's trapped on Earth, and it's Azrael's doing, trapped in an old man who's beat nearly to death, who's being kept on life support. That way, he's trapped. I loved that. That to me was as ingenious as saying Bartleby and Loki don't fly. That way, it slows down the pace of the movie, and here's the reason why. I love that. And the second bit I want to hit you with is God basically forgiving Bartleby in the end. Like, I'm not even still sure what to make of what happened because he's human and he hasn't crossed the threshold, but he dies to so where did he go exactly? So I'll get your take on both those. First, the God being trapped because he's a skee ball fan, and the last bit about Bartleby, was he forgiven? Is he in heaven? Is he in purgatory? Where is he? What do you think?
I mean, giving God a random human vice like skee ball is hilarious because,
Yes.
I mean, of all the things, skee ball is just so innocuous. Like, you don't really associate that with anything. It's just skee ball.
Right.
Like, if God had been, a snowboarding fanatic, that would have made sense in the late 90s because a lot of kids were into snowboarding. But no, skee ball, that's just kind of random. It's funny. As far as the other thing, though, I actually, so earlier in the movie, they said that, like, humans can't take God's voice, like, it just destroys them.
Right.
So isn't that how Bartleby dies? Isn't Bartleby just, like, kind of gone because God's voice sort of wipes them out, like, no heaven, no hell, just done?
Interesting. Yeah, because he becomes human because his wings have been shot off.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know because technically he's a human without sin because he hasn't. I mean, when his wings were shot off, did he kill anybody after that happened?
But he's not without sin because he hadn't gone through the threshold yet.
Ah, you're right. You're right. So, oh
So he's
man,
either nowhere or in hell,
right.
I think is basically the way we can look at this.
And plus, if he's in hell, that's a whole other part too, because now he's trying to get out of hell. I don't know. Gosh, I don't know. Because he thanks her. He thanks her. He's like almost in tears, and he says, "I'm sorry." And then when he knows what she's going to do, he says, "Thank you." And I'm thinking, wait, is he can't be getting back into heaven because if he was, then that's undoing what they were scared to death was going to happen in the movie to begin with.
Unless it's God doing it. Like, if God's the one that unbanishes him, then
Ah,
wouldn't that kind of negate that? But either way, like, it's one of those details that, like, they might have left unanswered, but it's also not really that important to the ending of the movie because, like, once he's gone, he's gone.
right.
I don't know.
Interesting.
It is weird though because there are a few different ways to look at it. Like, you could make arguments for him being in heaven, being in hell, and just being nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, really good cast. Best thing that Kevin's done to this point, in my opinion. I think probably everybody would maybe not everybody. Everybody's got their own take, but of course, the most financially successful thing that he's ever done. I'd love to see him. Do you think that there is a possibility? And he's always said he's already made the kind of movies he likes to make. He likes to make movies that he would like to watch and puts his friends in them. And he's not interested in something big budget. I mean, he's actually said that if he were approached by Marvel or by Warner Brothers for a Marvel or DC project, that he would probably say no because he's like, I would much rather be a fan because he's like, I know what would happen if I played in their toy box. I would get hate from everyone who hated what I did. And again, it feels like he's at the point in his life where he doesn't want to go through that anymore. Do you think there's a possibility at some point that he'll say yes or even get an offer? Or do you think we've seen him do what he's going to do?
I think anything is possible if it's the right project. Like, if they just say, like, I doubt this would happen, but let's just say Kevin Feige lost his mind and went, "All right, Kevin, I will pay you $20 million to make a project about whatever superhero you want in the Marvel catalog." Like, yeah, he's probably going to take that offer. But if they come to him and say, like, "Hey, do you want to maybe write the next Batman sequel?" He might be like, no, been there, done that. I'm good. But I could
Yeah.
also see him continuing to work with these TV projects. So, like, Marvel is making a lot of different styles of TV shows for these characters. Like, She Hulk looks like it's going to be almost a 30-minute sitcom.
Yeah, it does, right?
And so that makes me wonder if like one of these days they'll like, let's just do some weird project with Kevin Smith for one of these heroes. Like, let's give him just the most random X-Men characters nobody's ever heard of and say like, tell an origin story and see what happens.
Guido or Strong Guy from X Force feels like a character that might be down his alley. Howard the Duck.
See, I don't want to see him do Howard the Duck.
No?
I think Howard the Duck needs to be done by somebody who, this is going to sound weird. I don't want anyone who's a big fan of Howard the Duck to make the next Howard the Duck. And the reason why is because I feel like anyone who gets their hands on that property is going to go super far to the left and say, let's just make this the dumbest, goofiest comedy we can because everybody already laughs at this character. Or they're gonna try to go way too serious, which was the eventual downfall of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to see a bunch of kung fu fighting turtles brooding. Like, give us fun. So I feel like you got to give Howard the Duck to somebody who kind of falls in the middle. Like I think Peyton Reed was a great choice to take in after Edgar Wright to do the Ant-Man movies, because Peyton Reed seems to understand that balance between like the serious and the goofy.
Right.
But, if they're going to make a Howard the Duck cartoon, yeah, give it to Kevin Smith. Like, that would be hilarious.
Yeah, I think so too. Well, kids, there you have it. That is the 6M's take on quite the controversial subject that is religion. And again, that's as religious as you're ever going to hear this little show get, because it's not territory we venture into all that much. But Kevin Smith is a voice of his generation for sure. I think his contributions are, I was going to use the word important, and that sounds pretentious, and I don't mean it to, but I think that I think the business needs him, if for no other reason, that he's an indie filmmaker who succeeded and went mainstream. And I think that's pretty darn cool. And I think that a lot of guys coming up would love to get to the point where he's at now. No, he's not a critically acclaimed director. No, he's not on the Mount Rushmore of directors in Hollywood, but he's made it. I mean, he's doing what he loves to do for a living. We should all be so lucky. And again, I think Dogma's his best work. So, Chris, let me know what you think. Give me your last word on Dogma.
I think Dogma is a fun movie for a certain crowd. And, if you have already seen it and liked it, you're probably not going to hate it revisiting it. But just be warned that this movie is very much a product of the 90s. And like most things in the 90s, it's not going to hold up very well over time. And really quick, just to speak on what you were saying about Kevin Smith, I think the important thing that Kevin Smith's career has done is he inspired an entire generation of kids to get into filmmaking because they saw this schlub from New Jersey make a movie in black and white called Clerks. And then Hollywood said, yeah, we want to do more with you. So like, even if he's not a Steven Spielberg or Martin Scorsese considered director of that caliber, he's still the guy that a lot of people are going to go back and cite as the inspiration for them getting into filmmaking, because he proved that you don't need a million connections. You don't need $1 million budget. You just need some friends and a good idea.
And it should be noted that the shows we talked about in the CW, the DC CW universe, as it were, every show that Kevin has worked on, the cast and crew of every one of those shows have raved about him as a director and said he's the easiest guy to work with I've ever worked with. He's laid back, he's smart, he knows what he's doing. He lets us do what the scene calls for. And they fan over him as much as he fans over them, which I think is important. And they could have politely said it was fun and let it go at that, or they could have said no comment. But no, I've seen interviews where guys like Grant Gustin are gushing over, man, he's great. So that's testament also, I think, to the fact that he's a personable guy. He loves this stuff. And I think that's why he's a good fit doing that type of work. Will we ever see him do anything big? Kids, we don't know. As Chris said earlier, anything's possible. I personally believe something big is going to come at some point. I don't know how big. I don't know if we're talking Avengers big. Are we talking Guardians big? I don't know about that either. I don't know. Are we talking Madrox at some point? I think like you said, anything's possible. But I am a fan. So I'm always going to be in this guy's corner. But yeah, we'll see what the future holds. But in the meantime, that is Dogma. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.